Y'all planning for this?
Welcome back, TPR Nation. This is Jamie Shalansky in an episode of Worlds to Conquer. And today I want to talk to you about how we can avoid conflict and confusion and misunderstandings, especially right now when we have the most diverse group of people still operating and working in the workforce today. We've got all of these different generations across all the different aspects of industry, and we have a lot of miscommunication occurring that is really easy to fix if we just pause and remember at the end of the day, we're all human beings. We are human beings. We may choose to communicate through different devices and technology media of like email versus text versus phone calls versus letters versus hiring attorneys. But how do we de-escalate? How do we come back? And how do we train this next workforce as they come up, the millennials and the Gen Z, for what we're looking for? And also, how do we glean some of the amazing things that they're doing and incorporate it in our business so that we can constantly stay at the top of our game? So if any of you guys out there are fans of Key and Peele, they're two comedians or sketch artists. Oh my gosh, they are amazing. I absolutely love it. If you need what my office, we call it junk TV, it's sometimes you just need some junk food for your brain. And this is the kind of stuff it is. I used to give my assistant and our lead relationship manager, Victoria, hell about it because they love trash TV. In the mornings, I would come in and the first couple of hours out of my day, I'm spent trying to learn and ingest information. And I would just be bubbling with excitement to share with them different things that I had learned from story brick houses, all over Missouri and why they have missing bricks out of them. Or see-through, are they called paper houses? But where people would come and they would steal the bricks on the backside of the house. Or, maybe I learned a new marketing concept or maybe I learned a new communication. But I would just be bubbling with excitement. I'd want to talk to them about whatever I just learned on my commute into Anchorage to our office. And then they would be staring aghast at me, wanting to also share the information that they had learned the night before. And they are big Real Housewives fans. And so they just love their trash TV. Now, sometimes it's pretty convenient because when somebody says something that I don't understand because it's some type of slang or lingo that I don't know, I can quickly resource them and they'll let me know very quickly. So it does have some advantages when you do have people that like that sort of pop culture. But as they would share it with us, I'd say, hey guys, why don't you read these books? Or why don't we work on the professional development? Why don't we do all these different things? And Victoria said, Jamie, sometimes, and she's big into fitness, right? So she's a great runner. She's big into fitness. She literally, we call her a cheerleader because she was a cheerleader. And she says, sometimes, even though you eat clean and you work out all the time, you just need a binge day. You just need some junk food. You just need to turn it off. And she's like, and trash TV, that's what this is for us. It's just junk food. And so we don't do it all the time. We don't do it obsessively, but we do just every now and then need some mental junk food. So that's what we started calling it in our office. And one of the things that I absolutely love about the internet, I think the internet is amazing because it gave us these comedians that we never got to hear before take a stage. And the beautiful part about a comedian is that good comedians will make fun of a class of people, not a person, right? So that's an important part of telling a joke is that you can make fun of wives. You can't make fun of someone's wife, so that's that important distinction on that part. And so part of those comedians is Key and Peele, and they did an amazing job. They have this great texting one where they go back and forth and one of them sends a message. The other one gets super offended. They keep going back and forth. One of them thinks that the other one's being super nice and considerate. The other one is thinking that they're being so offensive and getting really escalated, getting super, super mad. So if you have a chance, Key and Peele and its text message confusion, and it's so great. And the way I used it was I showed it to my son and I said, hey, listen, text, especially between him and I, it can get confusing. Now, as part of him, when he was growing up, we did not let him have a cell phone until he was in high school. And he could have a cell phone when he was in high school because then he started having a job. So he could start helping contribute towards the payment for his phone plan. But it also also came with rules. And so we had him sign a social media and an electronics contract. And it clearly spelled out the expectations between both parties. What was permissible, what wasn't permissible, what made you lose your device, what made you be grounded to your room for the rest of your life, all these different things. So he didn't have to guess about what was appropriate. And then every 90 days, the first of the month, we'd pull out that contract and we'd revisit the social media rules. Anytime that he told me about something he saw on YouTube, or, if he posted a comment, I would say, hey, just real quick, I want to remind you what the rules are. And a lot of that was derived around hate speech, because it's very easy for this generation, but there are very limited physical consequences, right? Because for me, if you try, oh man, you want to talk about an important lesson? Listen to this one. This is probably, Lord knows when he made me a little bit more confrontational than most females. But when I was in 8th grade, there were 3 of us in our neighborhood, and it was Chantel, Shannon, and I. We'd all kind of grown up together. And this is about that junior high age with females. So as female relationships go, about that junior high, everyone kind of starts splitting off and dividing. And, maybe your longtime friends that you went to kindergarten with, you're not going to be friends with as you go into high school. And it's a really emotional, tumultuous time for females as they start learning like who their real friends are, what their real priorities are, what their goals are, what their boundaries are, especially when it comes to the opposite sex. So as life goes with girls, Shannon and I had gotten into a fight for a reason I cannot even remember to this day. Well, as we began to fight throughout the middle school, everyone began to spread rumors and saying that Chantel was on Shannon's side. And Chantel had been so mad at me that she was going to pick a fight. We were going to get into this altercation. And, this is the 90s, right? So this stuff happened. And so I came home, and Chantel was bigger than me. So I'm a fighter as a person. I mean, I don't look strong, but man, am I determined. But I also know when I'm going to get my butt kicked. You can size a person up and know when that might happen. And so when this occurred and these rumors are going around, I'm sick to my stomach because 1, I don't want to be in a fight. And 2, I don't want to be in a fight that I know I'm probably going to lose, though give it my best effort. And so my dad came home early that day because I think we had a seminar that night. So he came home to nap and he saw me fretting and he's like, well, what's on your mind? What's going on? Why? And he'd always say this to my brother and I, why are you dragging your bottom lip on the ground? And, and I was like, hey, I'm really stressed. Like this fight is going to happen tomorrow. I'm probably going to lose. That's going to be a huge blow to my ego, not to mention physical, altercations, all these repercussions and things like that. And he said, okay, get your shoes on. And I said, why? Where are we going? And he said, you're going down to Chantel's house. And I said, no, I'm not. And he goes, yeah, you are. You're going to go knock on our door and you're going to say, hey, I've been hearing that we've had a problem between each other. I didn't know if you've been hearing those rumors too. And I want to make sure that we settle it here and talk it out. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I am not going down to this girl's house. I am not going to knock on a door and ask for a whooping. Not going to happen. And my dad, he was like, no, get your stuff on. You're going now. And he forced me out of that door. And I had to, what was probably the longest walk of me barely putting one foot in front of the other as I'm like psyching myself up, preparing to get punched. I'm like, man, I'm not super fast, but I could go to the left, we could do this. And so I'm preparing in my mind for this massive physical altercation, right? And I walk down to her door. And it's right after school, so we'd all gotten off the school buses, but parents weren't necessarily home yet, right? And so I knock on her door, and she answers, and she's totally startled. There's no ring. She didn't see me coming. She's not avoiding it. This is when the doorbell rang, and people answered it. You wanted to see who was on the other side. So I answered the door, and there's Chantel, and she's totally surprised to see me. And she's like, hey, what's up? And I said, well, I've been real nervous all day because I keep hearing rumors that you want to fight me. And she was like, what? And she's like, I don't want to fight you. I've been hearing rumors you want to fight me. I was like, Chantel, I don't want to fight you. And she goes, well, great, because I don't want to fight you either. And I said, listen, Shannon and I had a disagreement. We're not really friends anymore. She's like, okay, and so we sat there for maybe 10 minutes of time and talked it out. And I left her house, and I could have I'm not a runner, but I could have run back to my house. And I walked in the door, and my dad's sitting there waiting for me with his hands crossed. And he said, well, I don't see any blood. How did it end? And I said, she doesn't want to fight me. And he goes, no. And he said, 85% of confrontations, both parties don't want to be where they're at. But that 15%, you better be ready for. And that really was a lesson that stuck with me. And he's reminded me throughout the years a couple of times about it. Now, he can't remember the girl's name, but he remembers exactly where he sent me off to. And he was right, because 85% of the time when I'm getting super frustrated, and what happens when we get frustrated? What happens when something occurs that triggers us, makes us mad, or violates a rule, or maybe takes us outside of our boundaries, and we are just fuming. And now what are we doing? We are jumping to conclusions. We are guessing that other person's motive. We are making assumptions and inferences and doing all of that to validate our feelings. We want to be mad. We want to be upset. We want to have validation about why we're feeling the way we're feeling. And so we sit there and we demonize this other person without stopping and picking up the phone or walking down the hall or knocking on the neighbor's door and saying, hey, do we have a problem here? Because if we do, let's figure it out. Let's you and I talk about, your point of view, my point of view, and see if we can't find some middle ground. And most of the time, people, when we're confronting other people, we will remember that human quality about us, and we will not want to wish another person harm, and we don't want life to be any more stressful than it already is. We don't want to be in a fight. We don't want to have a ton of confrontation, because every single day of our life is a battle. It is a battle. One of our rules here at the Perfect RA, and remember, the Perfect RA is 100% about the pursuit of perfection. We're looking to make it to the top of the mountain, and that's where we're headed. We aren't perfect. We're pursuing perfection, and that is what we are supposed to do as human beings. We have been gifted and blessed to be put on this earth and to have all of this abundance around us so that we can vigorously pursue perfection. But sometimes we get so absent-minded in remembering that the people around us are also human beings pursuing perfection. And so when we have conflict, when we have resistance, what would happen if instead of going to the worst place in your mind and imagining what that scenario is going to be like, what if instead you paused your feelings? You had control and discipline over your feelings. You clicked pause and you went and sorted something out. You looked another human in the eye. You picked up the phone. There's an entire 2 generations of people on this earth that do not know the phone can call other people, that it rings, you can answer it, you can have an oral communication. It's amazing. Instead, they're constantly texting. And what happens, just like when I told you to watch that Key and Peele skit, it's because we get these misunderstandings. How you write something, and do you want to know a huge misunderstanding? Gender differences in writing styles. I tend to be a masculine writer. What does that mean? I'm very blunt. I'm very direct. I like to lead with the point, and I don't put a lot of fluff inside of my email communication or my written communication. So as Matthew Jarvis often teases me, he takes every piece of written correspondence I send him and says, oh, Jamie just forgot to put the smiley faces in. And so that more smiley faces, I have to soften things up because people aren't used to a female being as direct, as bold, as blunt. And so sometimes my writing can come across really fierce, but that wasn't the intent. I'm not trying to go to war with you. I'm trying to get down to the facts so we can all move on. And I don't use a lot of fluff. I don't want to ask how your weekend was. That's your business. Why do I care? What did you do? I was on the phone with an attorney one time because during COVID, we had to settle litigation virtually. So I was representing a company. I was on the Zoom session with our attorney. The magistrate had stepped out. They went and conferred with the other party. So it was just her and I in the room. And she's like, what are you doing this weekend? And I was like, why? What? are you inviting me to hang out? Like, what's that? And I know she was just making chit chat. And so we both kind of laughed because she was direct also. And I said, I get it, Stacey. I got 7 minutes tops of chit chat at me, 7 minutes. After that, I'm exasperated. I don't want to talk about the weather. I don't want to talk about your plans this weekend unless it's interesting, right? Like teach me, learn, or I teach you, or, let's share in knowledge or information. But as far as passive comments, what are you doing this weekend? How's the weather? Those kind of things. No, thank you. Pass, hard pass. I would rather just go get other stuff done and I'm comfortable with silence, really comfortable with silence. So we have these incredible stylistic differences in the way that some people communicate. And that can be generational. It can be between genders. It can be between rank and file. If you have executives talking to team members, there are multiple linguistic tactics we have to take to navigate in a world in which so much of what our success is hinged upon is communication. So think about that. So much of our success is hinged on communication. And so imagine if that rule didn't apply. Think about every prospect appointment you've ever had. And, sometimes we do a lot at Shalansky & Associates, RIA up in Anchorage, Alaska. We get a lot of information for our prospects. In fact, so much that I had an overwhelming request by TPR people in the nation. They emailed into us at lifestyle@theperfectria.com and they said, hey, I want to know what Jamie gets in her prospect appointments. Can you share with us everything you're asking the prospect before you guys have that meeting? And so I think I did a 2-part series and went through a laborious episode of talking about everything that we ask for. Now, at the Perfect RA, we offer 2 types of membership. We have Backstage Pass for do-it-yourself, and we have Invictus for people that want one-on-one coaching. So if you're a Backstage Pass member and you want to know what our prospect process is and what documents we're asking prospects for, do not reinvent the wheel. Do not try to come up with a system all on your own because it's unique and personal to you. We run a multi-million-dollar enterprise office. Use what we're using. Do what we do. Why? Because it works, and you're going to need that brain power and that energy for unique and creative things in other places. This is not a place you would need it for. So conserve that energy. Use what we're using. Create a standardization. It will be successful for you. And as you elevate your practice, as you become more successful, especially if you're a solo advisor. If you're a solo advisor and it is you on the ship, it is not a whole crew, then you got to get back to your systems because you cannot be everything to everyone every hour of the day. You cannot. It's not sustainable. So developing systems and processes is how you radicalize success. It's how you level up. So in our laborious episode, we went through all of this information that we ask a prospect for before we even sit down and ever have a conversation with them. And so I could get all these documents in and I could look at it and go, man, I can build an awesome financial plan. I know exactly what they want. They have these 12 questions. I'm going to go through them and answer those all in the meeting. This is going to be great. And in my mind, when I'm going to have a great prospect meeting, I might get hired, I might not get hired, but I want to deliver massive value to them. You also know that we charge for our meetings, our prospect meetings. So I know that when I go into that meeting, I got to wow them with all the value by answering their questions. And so I'm geared up, I'm pumped, I'm going through this meeting and I sit down and in front of me are 2 just people I can't communicate with. Right? That I say something, maybe they cut me off, or maybe they're saying something and I don't understand what they mean by it. And we just can't paint a picture. We got all the tools in front of us, all the crayons, all the paper, but we can't paint a picture because we cannot communicate well. And if we can't communicate well in a prospect situation, we are sure as hell not going to communicate in a client situation. So a lot of success is contingent on your ability to communicate. Now, because we've been doing this for so long, Shalansky & Associates has been around for 40 years, we can pivot, right? Like we got a lot of arrows in the quiver that we can pivot and kind of adapt. One of the things my parents told my brother Mike and I growing up was, you need to know how to hobnob with the snobs and get on down with the good old boys. You got to do both. And so we can pivot in both scenarios, right? Like we need to go to fine dining and sip champagne, we'll curl that pinky and we've got that nailed down. But if we need to have a bonfire, throw on a t-shirt and somebody throw me a beer to that and make sure the mountains are blue, I'm down, So we can do both of those scenarios. It's not duplicitous. It's just a communication style that there are 2 groups of people, that there are often varying styles of communication that you have to use with an individual. So we can pivot. So if I'm going into that meeting and I can't pivot and it's not working, I'm not going to take a square peg and try to jam it into a round hole as hard as I can. Not because I don't have the strength, but because I know the result won't be pleasant for either of us in the long run. Communication is key to your success. And it's also key to the success of your individuals that you hire on your team. Because if you can't communicate well with your team, and this is one thing, I run with a lot of leaders, a lot of C-suite individuals. So you have your CEOs, your COOs, your CFOs. I run with a lot of them. And when it comes down to a problem where they said, hey, Jamie, we're probably going to have to get rid of this person. They're just not working, blah, blah, blah. I push back and I say, great, show me your communication with them. So if they're not delivering on the tasks that you've outlined, show me what you've outlined for them. And they're like, oh, well, I told them. And I'm like, all right, where is it written? Where's the example for them to follow? Where's the template that they're supposed to be guided by? Or are you assuming because you've made a 12-word sentence and explained your entire theory on how something should work, that they're just going to pick up all the inferences? I have never seen that happen. No matter how educated the individual was, no matter how much brilliance they had in their own right, no matter how much experience they had in their own job, I've never seen somebody fluidly be able to pick up right with a C-suite person, right with an executive, right with an advisor, and miraculously know what they're talking about. I've never seen it. Rather, this is about communication style. This is one of the reasons we run the DISC report in our office. D is driver, influencer, steady, and compliant. I need to know what are the communication styles. And then I need to be able to explain to an employee or a team member, this is my communication style. This is how I am. So I will try to adapt to you. Most of the time as a leader, I'm adapting to my team. Why? Because I've got tons more experience in it. I've got a ton more experience than my team does in adapting to different personalities. And so I will use that skill because guess what? I use that skill every single time I step into a conference room. Every single time I step into a conference room, I remain true to who I am, but I take my behavioral training, my emotional intelligence, and I adapt my conversation so that we can have the successful outcome. Now, that doesn't mean it always works brilliantly. Sometimes there are some people that just aren't going to like me. They're just not going to like me. Or, I got a client that every time I say something, she argues with what I say and says it back to me differently. Now, if I just worked with this client, I would fire in a heartbeat. However, it's more intricate than that always, right? Because it's also her parents, and I really like her wife. Her wife and I get along great. We have great communication together. It's no problem. So there are just people sometimes you're just not going to be able to communicate well with, and it doesn't matter how adaptable you are as an individual. So when it comes to running your team, when it comes to running appointments, when it comes to raising your kids or living in a neighborhood, how can you take those skills? How can you know what you know about communication and adapt them? So instead of always jumping the gun, wanting to get upset, creating a situation that may not be reality, then why don't we just click pause? Why don't we take a lesson right out of the Floyd Shalansky playbook? And anytime you've got a frog to eat, you get right up in the morning and you eat it. That's a Brian Tracy saying that my dad raised us with, and he sure as heck did it when he sent me down to get my what I thought was a butt whooping that day, but it wasn't a butt whooping. Instead, it was a great lesson. It was a lesson in facing confrontation, talking to human beings as human beings, and always searching for middle ground, always finding a way to compromise where both parties are giving and getting something. It's so important. So many times we want to have arguments instead of discussions. We want to fight with somebody just to take the moral high ground on a subject instead of just looking at them and saying, hey, you know what? This is how I'm feeling. This is what I'm thinking. This is the outcome I need. How can I help you? And getting that other person's perspective, because we're all human beings and we are all capable of compromise and really finding a better way in that pursuit of perfection. TPR Nation, you know, everything that we do at The Perfect RA is 100% about giving you actionable advice that you can take right now. So I would like to challenge you this next 30 days. Can you hit pause on your trigger? Can you hit pause on your emotions? Remove yourself from making knee-jerk reaction decisions and instead Go confront that person. And maybe it's the kid that you don't want to have an argument with, the teenager that's been totally unhinged lately. Maybe it's the nephew who you know is taking the wrong path, but you don't want to say anything for fear of stepping on somebody else's toes. Maybe it's your neighbor. It's just been kind of a jerk having parties late at night. Maybe it's that team member who you hired and was a rock star at first, but then started coming in 15, 20 minutes late. Maybe it's the partner who you thought the practice was going to go a certain direction, but they're really comfortable staying where they are. It's time to have the tough talks. It's time to have the kind of communication that matters because you're capable of having that type of conversation. You're capable of controlling your emotions and talking to another human being who is also here for the pursuit of perfection. And find that middle ground. Learn to communicate. TPR Nation, this is Jamie Shalansky in an episode of Worlds to Conquer. Go find people who share your values and change the world.
Hold on before we go. Something that you need to know. This isn't tax, legal, or investment advice. That isn't our intent. Information designed to change lives. Financial planning can make you thrive. Start today, don't think twice. Be a better husband, father, mother, and wife.